Hi, I'm Wayne Holtham. I'm the Digital Transformation Whisperer. And today we're here to talk to Sandeep, who's worked in the space with some clients as a project manager, but not the typical project manager that we might find, from a project manager resume. We see where project managers can, manage a schedule and those sort of things, but managing stakeholders is a different piece. And so we want to talk today with Sandeep about a project that he's been working on, and it was a more of a medium-sized business. It wasn't a large corporate business, and the various needs that he brought to the table to be able to let that client really work well with the solution integrator, as well as manage what it was looking to do as its digital transformation. So, welcome, Sandeep.
So one of the things that my client, who you mentioned, is a medium-sized organization that's in manufacturing, local manufacturing here in Australia. One of the key problems that they were trying to resolve is inefficiencies in the way they were manufacturing. And that led them to discover problems in supply chain, in sales, in finance, and so on and so forth. So the inefficiencies of actually getting a whole bunch of stakeholders and systems to work together was the motivation around it. The other motivation was expansion. They had huge vision to go forward with larger manufacturing footprint across Australia, and the current systems and processes they had just wouldn't cut the mustard, so to speak. So we were brought in, I specifically was brought in to help them to transition from that current state of limited system-based manufacturing processes to the next stage. So the role, as you mentioned, Wayne, was a project manager type role, and it's particularly interesting that we speak about project managers being not just the academic, clerical, transactional project managers, but also a mix of all kinds of soft skills and really the changing role of what we would almost think as a traditional ERP implementation project manager.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point, because my background with the client was I was involved early on with helping them select the software, and then work with the solution integrator to actually form an agreement. And from there, it was about the business then taking it on and resourcing as they needed. And at that time, they selected a project manager from within. And they had very minimal success in that, because they found it difficult for the person to actually carry out those duties, plus all of the other things that the applicant or the candidate was actually doing in his day-to-day job. And then so they then employed a project manager, which was your typical type, resume-based project manager. And that started to struggle. They couldn't manage the solution integrator. And along came someone like yourself, and I don't want to take the credit, but it actually happened in the way that, I sort of introduced you to the client, because I could see a specific need for that client that couldn't be met by the traditional way they were engaging with a project manager, or what represented project managers in the normal stream as such. And so for me, what are the things that you felt that were different about the way you acted and the way you actually brought value to the table, over and above what potentially you saw, what you walked into as such? You walked into a particular scenario. What are the first sort of things you felt you needed to actually take control of this job to actually help the client?
I think you've stumbled on the right word there, which is control. I think but the word control doesn't mean holding on to the reins and just kind of directing everything and expecting everything to fall in place, because the reality is that you're dealing with a whole raft of stakeholders with different objectives, with different motivations, with different ways of working. And I think, and this goes both internally and externally. And the discovery here was that the role of the project manager, if just bound to the traditional looking after the Gantt chart, managing risks in a tool, and just following up with people, that's fine. That's part of the process. That's part of what's required, but it's not even 10-20% of the story. What was required here was a way to manage all those different stakeholders' expectations, all those stakeholders' motivations, all those objectives. And as I said before, this includes external stakeholders. For the client, they had important external stakeholders whom they would not have done this project without. So we had to go in and actually take account of, or I in this case would have had to really take account of the number of, first of all, understanding the stakeholders, understanding what they wanted to do, understanding the difficulties they faced in the journey of this project, and how I could get it back on track. And the interesting discovery there was misalignment management. So I think the uh, when you have two or more parties trying to express what they want out of what their desires are, the direction they want to go, and it's completely misaligned, it really helps having a mediation party that comes in and brings those parties together. A lot of the times they have all the right intentions, they want to go in the right direction, and if a project manager in this case takes a back seat and says, well, I'm just going to let this play out, that is not a successful way of managing a project like this. The first step had to be step up and take all the experience that I could possibly muster up from my days of consulting as well as managing projects, and let's not discount it, a bit of technical knowledge, so I could talk the talk as well. I needed to bring all that together. I needed to make sure that there was credibility to the role, that I knew what I was doing. Then I could get some important traction, which I believe in the past, this was a part that was completely overlooked, and able to then steer the project back on track. And there are always these five critical success factors that I always think about: time, cost, quality, risk, and compliance. If I can steer that project back to what it's supposed to be, in the momentum that it's supposed to go towards, and as well as the stakeholders that need to be involved, and bringing them on the journey, and they willingly wanting to go on the journey, that to me was the main, call it my first month's work.
And you raised a really good point there, and I think that it was where the project, and why I saw that the project needed someone like yourself, was that thing of that mediation, understanding the tempo that was happening, the landscape that was there, and actually brokering with both parties a way forward. And I think that was that's a really good point that you put there. And the second piece, obviously, is the trust that you've got to build up to actually get to that point. And knowing that you've got to get trust early on, because it's very hard to actually keep fighting those battles and building those that momentum without both of those, the skills to mediate as well as the trust that they would have with you to actually go, well, okay, we can move forward. I understand what you're trying to get at, and I'm on the same page now.
Yeah, exactly. And the trust goes in both directions. The external parties also had to trust that they could get what they could get their they could get their perspective heard. That was important. But also keeping in mind that if I were to bring, I would have to have difficult conversations with both parties,
Yeah.
and it is one of those things where you think that having difficult conversation erodes trust. If anything, it actually it complements it or enhances it on many levels. And that was my one of my interesting. And I continue to rediscover that. That if you're honest, and if you're out there with the right intent, you can certainly build that trust. Now, one of the other challenges is always, well, I was wearing the client's hat. In other words, I was employed or contracted by the client, by my client. And the external stakeholders will always view me as a representative of the client. So to establish trust with external stakeholders, meant that I had to transcend that, the hat that I wear, and really take on the mediation role. So an outcome, I had all my clients' interests, of course, in mind, but I also understood, having been involved in digital transformation implementations in the past, some of the challenges that the external stakeholders, such as the SI or the vendor, software vendor, what they would be experiencing along the way. So I was able to, I guess in this way, uniquely marry up the perspectives, even though at the end of the day, um, my interest and my loyalty always remains with the client, and we want to see them succeed.
You need to be able to balance that sort of equally in a way, because the software integrator has come in, they're going to do the work. Sometimes they're a bit under resourced in the way they do things, or the way they typically do things isn't the best way of management. Normally they'll look for change requests to be able to get those to cover those gaps. And whereas if you actually manage them properly and work with them, you can actually achieve that thing where you get them working towards the objectives that you need to achieve, as well as your client who you're supporting and working for, actually delivering on things that they need to deliver on. Because that's obviously the challenge, is sometimes things haven't been done in time, and the software integrator doesn't have those tasks that they need done in time. And so it's managing all of those sort of stakeholders, and all of the deliverables from those stakeholders as well, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if I were to reflect on how that journey started, and potentially your viewers and listeners may want to actually know how, what are the 5 or 6 things, tactical things that they could do to something to actually extend that level of trust. I know that in one of the first things that had to be established is my appreciation of the client, or the system integrator's approach,
Yeah.
and really scrutinizing it and seeing the positives of that approach, and not dismissing it as soon as I was there, which is the tendency for some who have got a rich background in a certain way of delivering projects to be a little more uh, uh, set in their ways, so to speak. But having said that, keeping an open mind and bringing in that objective mindset to the situation was a key part of it. But also uh, producing a timeline. That means the visual artifacts that I was creating, and you talked about deliverables and outcomes. One of the key project management deliverable and management tool is the schedule, is the Gantt chart, is the is your timeline, is your phases, is your milestones, like all those wonderful things. Those concepts and those artifacts are definitely incredibly useful. I had to quickly establish myself as being the custodian of that artifact. Now, what that meant is that every voice of the whole stakeholder ecosystem was represented. That means the vendor could see not just their team, but their individual names on it.
Mm.
Right? And they were given an opportunity to contest it. They were given an opportunity to provide feedback on it. The internal stakeholders also needed to see their names and their allocation on that. System integrator looked at this and went, okay, well, I am increasingly they from their perspective, increasingly of the view that we're going to have to work towards that timeline, and any changes that they make on their own internal background, internally, I mean, it's fine unless it makes it on that schedule. So that's how I attempted to get control, or to put it all back into the one artifact that we said, this is the master artifact, we're working towards this, and we as the client was the custodians of it. The other part of it is communication.
Yeah.
Now, communication is, of course, several podcasts that you can create out of that. But one part of the actual communication piece is to make sure that the approach, or the direction of doing things, like, for example, doing demonstrations of the first build, or the first iterative build of the solution, well before UAT or any of the other testing stages, that we could bring a structure to it. So we, as the client, when we communicate this back to the system integrator, we're saying, and this tool vendor, we're saying, this is our structure. We've planned it out well, and we've planned to the minute. And this is where we see you playing a part, as in the system integrator, the vendor, playing a part in that process. We will now take a moment to brief all their individuals that are involved in it. So all the functional consultants, for instance, the data migration specialist, and so on and so forth, the configuration, the solution architect, they're all involved in the communication. So every step of the way, as our internal stakeholders become aware of how this project unravels, so does your system integrator. And this is often, from my perspective, underestimated, the power of something as consistent communication across the whole board. And of course, this is also part of bringing people on the journey.